the silent collapse of critical thinking. Carl Jung reveals widespread collective stupidity. As Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." In today's world, flooded with noise and endless information, true critical thinking is silently disappearing. But what happens to our lives and our society when we stop questioning, stop reflecting, and simply follow the crowd? Here at Spiritual Wisdom, we'll uncover this hidden danger and why it matters more than ever for your personal growth and happiness. I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe people are losing the ability to think deeply for themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective could inspire someone else on their journey. 1. The disappearance of critical thinking. Modern society is slowly losing one of its greatest treasures, the ability to think critically. Instead of pausing to question, reflect, and reason, many people now accept surface-level opinions and collective narratives as if they were unquestionable truths. What philosophers describe as collective stupidity is not just a distant idea, it is visible in daily life, from the way people consume news to how they follow trends without ever asking, why? Or, is this really true? Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." His words reveal the uncomfortable truth. Genuine thinking requires courage, effort, and independence, but judgment, conformity, and blind acceptance are far easier. The noise of modern information overload plays a major role in this collapse. Every day, you are bombarded with headlines, posts, videos, and opinions, all competing for your attention. The sheer volume tricks the mind into shortcuts. Confirmation bias makes you cling to what feels familiar. Groupthink pushes you to agree with the crowd, and emotional reactions replace calm reasoning. When the external noise is louder than your inner voice, intelligence becomes dull, and wisdom is forgotten. Spiritual wisdom teaches that silence and reflection are gateways to clarity. Yet silence is precisely what most people avoid in today's restless culture. Speed is another trap. In a world that glorifies urgency, the faster an opinion spreads, the more credible it appears. But speed is not the same as truth. Quick judgments might soothe the ego's need for certainty, but they rarely nurture genuine understanding. Albert Einstein reminded us, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Taking time to slow down, ask deeper questions, and embrace uncertainty is no weakness. It is a profound act of intelligence. True spiritual awakening often begins with admitting, "I do not know yet," and from that humility, real wisdom can grow. Echo chambers further deepen the problem. Algorithms feed you what you already like, creating the illusion that the whole world agrees with you. It feels comfortable, even safe. But Carl Jung's psychology warns that growth only occurs when you face the shadow of those uncomfortable truths that challenge your identity. By seeking out voices that respectfully disagree, you expand your awareness, sharpen your mind, and develop resilience against manipulation. Socrates, the father of philosophy, declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Examination is not about negativity. It is about living fully awake instead of drifting with the crowd. Yet awareness alone is not enough. Practice is required. Start by consuming information slowly, reading one meaningful article deeply instead of skimming 10 shallow ones. Distinguish facts from stories and reframe what you learn in your own words. Then stress test your ideas. Ask yourself, what would a wise critic challenge here? and answer honestly. Most importantly, honor the mystery of life by holding space for uncertainty. This is not ignorance. It is spiritual wisdom in action, because the willingness to remain open is the foundation of growth. Spirituality and intelligence are not enemies. They are allies. Spiritual awakening is not abandoning reason. It is expanding it, aligning the intellect with conscience and inner truth. Jung's process of individuation asks you to integrate both the conscious mind and the unconscious depths, so that your decisions are guided by wholeness rather than by the pressure of the crowd. This is how you reclaim sovereignty of thought, by uniting critical thinking with spiritual wisdom. And so, the collapse of critical thinking does not have to be your story. Collective stupidity may spread like fog, but you are not powerless. One thoughtful choice each day, choosing silence over noise, reflection over reaction, honesty over pretense, can restore your inner clarity. By doing so, you not only protect yourself, but also inspire others. In times of confusion, the world does not need more loud voices. It needs wise ones. And that begins with you. Comment below. I choose critical thinking. If you're ready to rise above the noise and reclaim your power of awareness. 2. Systems conditioning. Obedience. Education, the very system meant to liberate the human mind, often does the opposite by rewarding memorization over imagination and conformity over curiosity. From the earliest years, children are trained to repeat rather than to question, to obey rather than to create. And this conditioning is not accidental. As Noam Chomsky and John Taylor Gatto have pointed out, these structures were deliberately designed to manufacture consent and obedience. Instead of nurturing the fire of individuality, the classroom frequently teaches the art of compliance, dimming the natural spark of inquiry that is essential for both spirituality and spiritual awakening. The irony lies in the fact that the very institution promising freedom of thought subtly programs obedience, embedding within society a mindset that values fitting in more than thinking freely. As life unfolds, this conditioning merely shifts its form rather than disappearing. The media, once perceived as a vehicle of awareness, now largely operates as an algorithm-driven echo chamber, feeding individuals only what aligns with their preferences and shutting out dissonant perspectives. Rather than broadening horizons, it locks people into cycles of confirmation bias, ensuring they see only what comforts them, never what challenges them. Carl Jung's words ring true here. People don't have ideas. Ideas have people. Today, ideas are manufactured, packaged, and algorithmically delivered in ways that hijack attention and shape entire realities before a person ever pauses to question. The collapse of critical thinking is not loud or violent. It is silent, disguised as entertainment, convenience, and relevance, until individuals unknowingly exchange discernment for distraction. This process creates a society vulnerable to what philosophers now call collective stupidity, not stupidity as a lack of intelligence, but as the absence of applied intelligence. It is the phenomenon of brilliant minds dulled into passivity by systems that prize obedience. The danger lies in its comfort. No one forces this submission, but through rewards of ease and conformity, people willingly surrender their intellectual independence. In classrooms, students are praised for repetition instead of originality, and in the digital world, reactions are valued over reflection. The end result is a collective mind stripped of depth, unprepared to question, and easily manipulated by narratives that demand no effort to accept. Yet within this decline lies the seed of awakening, for spirituality reminds us that awareness is the great act of rebellion. To resist this conditioning, one must begin with the courage to ask, why? Why do I believe this? Why do I trust this system? Why do I consume this narrative? Such questions ignite the process of spiritual awakening, revealing that liberation is not merely mystical, but deeply practical. The daily act of reclaiming your ability to think, discern, and choose consciously. Critical thought becomes a sacred act, a way of honoring the divine intelligence within and living beyond manipulation. In modern life, this can mean stepping outside the endless loop of algorithm-driven feeds to engage with perspectives that challenge and expand you. It can mean teaching children the power of curiosity rather than the comfort of rote answers. It can mean choosing reflection over reaction, solitude over noise, and authenticity over conformity. Carl Jung reminded us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. To look within is to see through the illusions of systems that thrive on passivity, and to awaken spiritually is to reclaim your sovereign mind. By doing so, you not only rise above collective conditioning, but also embody the antidote to society's silent collapse, an intelligent, awakened presence that brings light into a world dulled by obedience. Do you see how systems are conditioning obedience? If you do, stand firm in truth and declare it in the comments. I will not be controlled by the system. I choose spiritual wisdom. 3. Information overload and mental shortcuts. Every single day, the human brain is flooded with more information than it was ever meant to process. And under this pressure, it learns to take shortcuts. Instead of carefully weighing facts, it leans on patterns like cognitive biases, social proof, and groupthink. These shortcuts can sometimes be useful, helping us make decisions quickly. But when they dominate our inner life, they begin to quietly weaken our independence of thought. People start relying on what others believe instead of reasoning for themselves. And in doing so, they allow misinformation and conformity to spread almost effortlessly. Carl Jung once remarked, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And his words ring even more true today, as many unconsciously choose imitation over reflection, repetition over reasoning, and belonging over truth. Social media makes this collapse even faster. A single trending post can shape the opinions of millions, not because it is true, but because it is popular. When everyone seems to agree, it feels safer to conform than to question. And this is the trap of social proof. Groupthink emerges when entire communities, institutions, or even nations adopt the same beliefs without daring to challenge them, repeating narratives that may be hollow or even dangerous. Intelligence, which should be the flame that guides humanity, is often dimmed to blend in with the collective. Jung described this as collective stupidity, a condition where people are unaware that their independence has been surrendered. The silent collapse of critical thinking doesn't announce itself. It creeps in gradually, every time someone chooses comfort over courage, approval over inquiry, and acceptance over authenticity. This is where spirituality and spiritual development become powerful tools of resistance. Real spirituality does not only connect you with the divine, it awakens your awareness and restores your ability to think clearly and choose wisely. Spiritual awakening means learning to pause before absorbing what the crowd says, to listen to your own inner compass, and to ask yourself, does this align with truth? Does this carry wisdom? Does this nourish my growth or feed my fear? Spiritual development strengthens this discipline, allowing you to hold steady even in a storm of information. It teaches you that your mind is sacred, not something to be controlled by algorithms, mass opinion, or the loudest voices in the room. The message is simple yet urgent. Do not hand over your critical thinking to the collective. Seek truth beyond appearances. Question what you consume, and nurture your spirituality as the foundation of clarity. Intelligence is not measured by the amount of information you absorb, but by how deeply you can discern meaning within it. By cultivating spiritual development, you rise above groupthink, resist the seduction of false certainty, and live with authenticity and courage. In doing so, you not only protect your own mind, but also become a beacon of truth in a society that has quietly forgotten how to think. Stay connected with our community of wisdom by subscribing to Spiritual Wisdom. Here, we explore how to rise above information overload, awaken true critical thinking, and reclaim your spiritual awakening. Remember, you are not meant to drown in noise. You are meant to shine with clarity, intelligence, and inner truth. 4. Decline of reading and sustained attention. Digital media has reshaped the human mind in ways we often fail to notice, training us to skim quickly instead of reflecting deeply. The endless stream of headlines, notifications, and short bursts of content keeps us reactive but not reflective, fast but not wise. Marianne Wolfe warns that without sustained attention, true analysis and reflection vanish, eroding the very foundation of critical thinking. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult, that is why most people judge." And this truth echoes louder than ever today. When judgment replaces reflection, intelligence shrinks to surface-level reactions, and spiritual wisdom gets drowned in a sea of distraction. Every time you scroll through social media, skim an article, or switch rapidly between screens, you are training your brain to avoid patience, endurance, and contemplation. Deep reading, sitting with a paragraph until its meaning unfolds, wrestling with a complex idea, these acts strengthen the mind, yet they are becoming rare. Just as the body weakens when left unchallenged, the mind weakens when deprived of sustained thought. This erosion of mental endurance is not dramatic or loud. It is silent, subtle, and profoundly dangerous. As Socrates declared, the unexamined life is not worth living. Without the discipline to examine, reflect, and question, we risk drifting into unexamined lives, governed by noise rather than wisdom. A society that forgets how to read deeply soon forgets how to think critically. People without the habit of attention become vulnerable to shallow narratives, propaganda, and manipulation. What follows is the collapse of collective intelligence into what Jung described as the mass mind, where individuals abandon their own discernment and dissolve into the unthinking patterns of the crowd. This is not merely a decline in literacy. It is the silent collapse of critical thinking itself, and with it comes the rise of widespread collective stupidity. The loss is not just intellectual, but spiritual, because without reflection and depth, humanity loses its connection to inner truth. Yet the responsibility and the power to resist this collapse remain in your hands. Ask yourself when you last gave your full attention to a book, an essay, or even a single page without reaching for your phone. Ask yourself when you last sat in silence, letting your thoughts wander freely instead of filling every gap with stimulation. These small decisions shape your intelligence, sharpen your insight, and strengthen your inner life. To live with spiritual wisdom in this noisy world is to reclaim your attention, to practice patience with your thoughts, and to seek meaning beyond the superficial. Critical thinking begins with the simple act of paying sustained attention. Intelligence flourishes not in distraction, but in depth, and spiritual awakening requires you to slow down, focus, and absorb ideas until they transform you. Jung reminded us, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. By resisting the pull of constant distraction and reclaiming the sacred space of reflection, you protect your independence of thought and awaken the deeper intelligence within. In a world rushing toward collective stupidity, choosing to read deeply, think independently, and reflect courageously is nothing less than an act of spiritual rebellion. 5. Emotional discomfort and ego protection. Critical thinking is not simply an intellectual exercise. It is a confrontation with the very core of who you believe yourself to be, and that is why so many find it unbearable. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And this truth reveals why discomfort so often sends people fleeing from inquiry. To think critically is to pierce the protective veil of the ego, to admit that your most cherished beliefs might be flawed, and to step willingly into uncertainty where the ground beneath your identity begins to tremble. Instead of embracing this path, people often retreat into tribal identities, clinging to slogans and surrounding themselves with echo chambers that protect them from having to change. These psychological shelters are not built on truth, but on ego protection, designed to silence the humility that authentic inquiry demands. In daily life, you can see how this pattern plays out. Scroll through social media, and you will find endless repetition of the same phrases, the same outrage, the same unexamined conclusions, recycled not to enlighten, but to validate. People cling to their group's narrative as if questioning it would annihilate them, because on a deeper level, their ego's survival feels at stake. But true spirituality, the kind that leads to spiritual awakening, asks you to do something radically different, to tolerate the unease, to welcome the disruption, and to surrender certainty in exchange for growth. Every act of critical thought becomes an act of spiritual wisdom, because it is not just the mind that awakens, it is the soul. The mechanism that keeps people locked in denial is cognitive dissonance, that inner tension we feel when reality contradicts what we want to believe. Rather than endure the tension and allow it to reshape us, we deny, defend, and distract ourselves. Yet the very discomfort we avoid is the medicine we need, for it reveals where illusion still has power over us. Jung's work reminds us that only by facing what is uncomfortable, the shadow, the contradictions, the blind spots, do we awaken to real intelligence. Avoidance may soothe the ego, but it starves the spirit. Confrontation may wound the ego, but it liberates the soul. In our modern world, this collapse of critical thinking shows up everywhere. In politics, people are quick to defend party lines instead of asking difficult questions. In consumer culture, people accept marketing narratives without reflection, buying into illusions of happiness. Even in relationships, People often repeat inherited patterns instead of questioning the beliefs that keep them trapped. Social media amplifies these tendencies, rewarding conformity, outrage, and shallow thinking over humility, nuance, and depth. But spiritual awakening begins the moment you decide to step out of the echo chamber and risk discomfort in the name of truth. When your beliefs are challenged and you feel that sting of resistance, that is the very moment you are invited to grow. Instead of rushing to defend yourself or escape into familiar narratives, pause and ask, what truth is trying to break through here? This pause is not just an intellectual act, it is a sacred act. It transforms your relationship with yourself and with reality. Intelligence then ceases to be about clinging to being right. It becomes about awakening to what is real, no matter how unsettling it may be. And in that surrender, you move beyond the ego's need for protection into the expansive clarity of spiritual wisdom, where growth, freedom, and true awakening finally become possible. 6. Social media and manipulation. Social media has quietly become one of the most powerful forces shaping the way people think, yet it erodes critical thought in ways many do not recognize. Platforms are not built to encourage reflection or patience. They are built to amplify speed, outrage, and emotional reaction. As Marshall McLuhan once said, "The medium is the message," and today that message is clear. What matters is not truth or wisdom, but virality. Instead of rewarding depth, the system rewards conformity, punishes thoughtfulness, and teaches people that the loudest voice will always be heard above the wisest one. The result is a culture where people no longer feel safe to express independent ideas because algorithms elevate emotional sparks over meaningful dialogue, leaving us with the illusion that popularity equals truth, while history shows that the greatest wisdom was often rejected at first. This distortion of values appears everywhere. Debates are reduced to noise, discussions turn into battles for attention, and opinions spread faster than facts because outrage fuels the machine. In this environment, Carl Jung's warning about the dangers of collective stupidity becomes painfully real. When individuals surrender their ability to think critically, they fall into the tide of the group mind, losing the independence of their inner voice. What could have been a tool for learning and connection often becomes a cycle of reaction, distraction, and imitation, where people trade away intelligence and spiritual wisdom for the fleeting satisfaction of belonging to the crowd. If you pause to look inward, the effect is undeniable. Hours spent scrolling rarely leave you feeling centered or wiser. Instead, they leave you scattered, reactive, and overwhelmed. Social media is not a neutral tool, it actively shapes consciousness, determining whether you move toward growth or toward passive acceptance of whatever narrative dominates the screen. True spirituality asks for awakening, for the courage to step back and question, to discern between what uplifts the soul and what merely consumes energy. Spiritual development depends on reclaiming this inner authority, choosing silence when noise is overwhelming, choosing reflection when reaction is demanded, and choosing truth when popularity shouts otherwise. The lesson is simple yet urgent. Do not surrender your critical thinking to algorithms designed to exploit your emotions. Slow down your responses, nurture spaces where depth matters more than speed, and protect your mind as carefully as you protect your body. Ask yourself with honesty whether what you consume feeds your higher self or drains it, and act accordingly. In a time where critical thought is collapsing quietly but powerfully, resisting collective stupidity becomes an act of spiritual awakening. By choosing awareness over distraction, intelligence over conformity, and truth over virality, you step into the role of a conscious individual who carries clarity and wisdom in a world that desperately needs it. 7. Cognitive traps. Fast thinking, bias, groupthink. Daniel Kahneman revealed that the human mind often takes shortcuts through what he called fast thinking, a mode driven by instinct and emotion that helps us react quickly, but leaves us vulnerable when we neglect slow thinking, the deeper, reflective analysis that protects us from illusion. When we lean too much on speed, we stumble into traps such as confirmation bias, propaganda, and groupthink, mistaking comfort for truth and familiarity for wisdom. Even intelligent individuals are not immune, because intelligence without awareness easily becomes manipulation disguised as thought. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." And this truth exposes why collective stupidity spreads so easily. People prefer quick judgments over the harder path of reasoning. Propaganda exploits this weakness by offering ready-made slogans instead of complex realities, while confirmation bias locks us into echo chambers that affirm our beliefs but quietly strip us of independence. Social media amplifies this danger by feeding us the same voices, the same patterns, until what feels like personal intelligence is only recycled noise, preventing real spiritual awakening and blocking the door to authentic wisdom. The more we surrender to the group, the more we silence our individuality. And this is where groupthink tightens its grip. Jung warned that the larger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes. And history proves this again and again as entire societies filled with brilliant minds fall prey to blind conformity. From political movements to financial manias, people abandon critical thought in exchange for the comfort of belonging, and in doing so, they trade their freedom for illusion. Spiritual wisdom reminds us that intelligence without courage collapses into imitation and fear. And what begins as harmless agreement becomes collective blindness. If you look closely at your own life, you may notice how often these traps whisper into your choices. You may have believed something simply because everyone else did, or dismissed an idea because it was uncomfortable, not because it was false. You may have stayed silent when your inner voice urged you to question, just to avoid rejection. These are not signs of weakness, but reminders of how subtle the human mind is, and how easily it drifts when not anchored. Yet this awareness is the first spark of freedom, because the moment you see the trap, you begin to step outside of it. Kahneman reminds us that slow thinking demands effort, but effort is the price of clarity. Jung reminds us that awakening demands courage, for true consciousness often means standing apart from the crowd. The truth is simple but powerful. You must guard your intelligence as a sacred gift. Question the narratives handed to you. Seek ideas that challenge your certainty, and refuse to let the roar of the masses drown the quiet authority of your own reason. To do so is to protect not only your mind, but also your spirit. For genuine spiritual wisdom is not about escaping reality, but about piercing through it with clarity. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you choose to slow down, reflect, and think for yourself, you step beyond collective stupidity and begin to embody a higher intelligence. An intelligence that liberates you, awakens you, and leads you into true freedom. 8. The spiritual dimension of critical thinking. Critical thinking, when seen through the lens of spirituality, is far more than the act of analyzing arguments or weighing evidence. It is the courage to look directly into the soul. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And this is exactly where the silent collapse begins. To think critically is to break free from the safety net of collective illusions, to question not only the world around you, but also the hidden motives within yourself. It demands courage to resist conformity, humility to release the ego, and detachment from the identity-based beliefs that keep you chained to the crowd. Spiritual awakening begins in that uncomfortable but liberating moment when you stop asking, "What group do I belong to?" and start asking, "What truth am I willing to face within myself?" In today's world, this dimension of thinking is more vital than ever, for information has become louder, faster, and more manipulative, tempting you to confuse noise for wisdom. Intelligence without reflection leads only to shallow reactions, while spiritual wisdom teaches that true understanding comes not from consuming more, but from pausing, questioning, and discerning. Each time you stop before reacting, each time you challenge your own assumptions rather than blindly echoing another's voice, you are exercising a spiritual discipline. Like a muscle, this practice grows stronger with use, and as it strengthens, so does your soul. The path is not easy. It requires patience in the face of uncertainty, strength to endure misunderstanding, and humility to accept when you are wrong. Yet this is where real transformation happens, in the silence between stimulus and response, in the willingness to sit with discomfort until clarity emerges. Spirituality reminds us that awakening is not about gaining new layers of belief, but about peeling away the illusions that have clouded vision for too long. Amid political propaganda, shallow entertainment, and the hypnotic pull of digital distraction, your soul longs not for conformity, but for authenticity. To think critically as a spiritual act is to refuse the easy path of convenience and instead align with truth, which always sets you free. Jung warned of the collective shadow, the darkness that grows when individuals abandon responsibility and allow the crowd to think for them. To give away your critical mind is to give away your soul. For individuality is the very bridge that connects you to higher wisdom. Spiritual awakening means reclaiming this birthright, daring to see where others look away, daring to speak where others remain silent, daring to walk the path of truth, even if it isolates you. In this way, critical thinking becomes your compass, your shield, and your liberation. It is the union of intelligence and spirit, guiding you toward deeper meaning, greater freedom, and an authentic life rooted not in illusion, but in the eternal light of wisdom. And so, as we reflect on the silent collapse of critical thinking and the rise of collective stupidity, remember this: awareness is the first step to reclaiming your power. Carl Jung reminded us that thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge. But you don't have to follow the crowd. Choose instead to question, to reflect, and to awaken. If this message resonated with you, Don't forget to like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos, where we continue to explore the depths of spirituality, psychology, and awakening. Carl Jung warns us, modern social life feels like psychological torture. All the world's a stage, wrote Shakespeare. But what happens when the performance becomes a prison? Carl Jung once warned that the more society conforms to the persona, the mask we wear in public, the more disconnected we become from our true self. In a world obsessed with surface-level networking, filtered smiles, and shallow exchanges, many of us feel like we're suffocating in a crowd scene, but not truly known. If you've ever walked into a room and felt lonelier than when you were alone, this message is for you. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever felt socially drained just by trying to be polite? Let's talk about it. Your voice might be the one that makes someone else feel seen. 1. Modern social life is performative and inauthentic. Most people today don't realize they're living inside a performance. Modern social life has become a stage where authenticity is sacrificed for applause, where every smile is rehearsed and every word is filtered for approval. People no longer show up as themselves. They show up as the version they think will be accepted. This isn't a connection. It's survival dressed in charm. And the tragedy is, we've gotten so used to pretending that we forget what it feels like to be real. You sense it when conversations feel hollow, when you walk away from a gathering more drained than nourished, when your laughter sounds loud, but your soul stays silent. This psychological dissonance is the cost of conforming to a world that fears the raw and the true. Carl Jung warned us that when we trade our authenticity for belonging, we lose both. He said, shame is a soul-eating emotion, and in today's world, shame hides behind smiles, behind curated profiles, behind the constant need to be liked. Most social interactions are not rooted in presence, but in performance. They're transactional, not transformational. The goal isn't to connect, but to impress. And what's even more dangerous is that we've normalized this. We've built a culture where being emotionally unavailable is cool, where small talk replaces truth, and where being too deep, too real, too sincere is seen as weakness. Jung, along with other visionaries like Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard, and Nietzsche, exposed the illusion of the crowd. They all agreed, the masses do not represent truth. The crowd seduces you into forgetting yourself. It rewards the persona and punishes the soul. And so, we wear masks, one for work, another for friends, a third for family, until the original face fades completely. The more you split yourself to be accepted by others, the more disconnected you become from your essence. The irony is, the more you try to fit in, the more invisible you feel. This is why so many feel lonely, even in a room full of people. Not because they're alone, but because no one sees the real version of them. The spiritual wisdom buried in this discomfort is that your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's your intelligence speaking. It's your unconscious whispering, this isn't you. You're not meant to be an actor in someone else's play. You're meant to be the author of your own. When everything feels fake around you, it's because the truth within you is waking up. You're becoming allergic to inauthenticity. You're no longer able to tolerate shallow energy, and that's a sign of growth, not isolation. When the soul begins to remember itself, It no longer fits into spaces built for masks. It craves depth, silence, presence, and truth. To reclaim yourself in a world that's constantly asking you to edit who you are is the ultimate act of spiritual rebellion. To stop performing and start feeling. To stop impressing and start expressing. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And yet, that is the exact path to liberation. When you start honoring what feels true instead of what looks good, you begin to live in alignment. You begin to attract real connections, relationships that don't demand masks, but invite presence. This isn't about withdrawing from society. It's about transforming how you show up in it, not as a product of it, but as a conscious creator within it. Comment below, "I value authenticity over performance," if you're ready to break free from the inauthentic roles modern society expects you to play. 2. Authenticity is punished, not rewarded. Those who refuse to dilute their truth are often labeled as difficult. In a society obsessed with presentation, the person who values depth over politeness, silence over performance, and authenticity over approval becomes a threat to the unspoken rules. You are not antisocial because you dislike small talk. You are not anxious because you avoid shallow conversations. What you're experiencing is not a disorder, it's spiritual awakening. You are sensitive to energy, attuned to truth, and unwilling to trade your peace for performance. While others are content to exist in carefully curated versions of themselves, you long for something real, something unfiltered, raw, and honest. And that longing makes you rare. The discomfort you feel in modern social life is not a personal flaw. It is evidence of your emotional intelligence and spiritual depth. And those qualities do not flourish in rooms that reward masks over mindfulness. Every time you step into a space where your silence is mistaken for weakness, or your honesty is mistaken for rudeness, remember that you're not meant to blend in. You're wired to connect, not conform. You're here to feel the frequency beneath the words, to sense what is unspoken, to see the soul behind the smile. That level of perception is a sacred gift. But in a world that fears vulnerability, it is often misjudged. People who value noise over nuance cannot grasp the quiet power of your presence. And so they call it awkward. But Carl Jung reminded us that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. When you accept your depth, your clarity, your need for meaning, you disrupt the entire illusion that being socially accepted equals being spiritually fulfilled. You might feel like you don't belong in spaces where performance is the norm. That's because you don't. Your spirit rejects pretense. Your nervous system reacts to fakeness like poison. You're not interested in surface-level status games. You're here for soul recognition. That's why you feel out of sync in rooms filled with polite competition and energetic masks. You can't pretend you didn't notice the disconnect. And that's not a weakness. That's what it means to be awake. In a world that celebrates artificial connection, real presence is revolutionary. The pain of being misunderstood is not a sign you should shrink. It is a signal that you're growing beyond the need for approval. Spiritual wisdom teaches us that what isolates you today will elevate you tomorrow, because your vibration will call in those who don't just see your light, but speak your language. The more you honor your need for sacred solitude, authentic connection, and soul-centered conversation, the more you create space for your true tribe. You don't need to explain your silence, apologize for your intensity, or pretend you're okay in environments that numb your soul. You are not broken for needing depth. You are not too much for wanting meaning. You are simply tuned in to a higher frequency of truth. In that space, you will never need to perform. You will only need to be. And being, in its most honest form, is the most powerful act of all. If you've ever felt punished for simply being yourself, you're not alone. Like this video, subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom, and share your truth in the comments. Type, "I honor my authentic self, no matter the cost." 3. Noise addiction and toxic positivity dominate. Modern society thrives on distraction. We are surrounded by a relentless stream of notifications, background noise, performative conversations, and curated lives on social media. What once might have been tools for connection have become compulsions we rarely question. The addiction to noise, both digital and emotional, has left us estranged from silence, afraid of our own depth, and uncomfortable with solitude. In this cultural climate, where the surface is celebrated and inner stillness is misinterpreted as laziness or depression, those who seek truth are often labeled as too sensitive or too much. But the truth is, our aversion to silence isn't a neutral habit. It is a spiritual disconnection, a sign that we have become strangers to ourselves. Carl Jung observed that modern life, when stripped of reflection and authenticity, becomes a kind of psychological torture for those who long to live with meaning. He saw early on what is now undeniable: a society that encourages noise to avoid feeling and rewards masks over the soul. And yet, when someone speaks honestly about their inner battles, they're often met not with empathy, but with what we now call toxic positivity, a forced optimism that dismisses pain rather than honors it. Just be grateful, they say. Think positive thoughts, as if gratitude could replace the deeper need to be heard, seen, and understood. In a world obsessed with good vibes, real emotion becomes unwelcome. But spiritual development cannot happen in a vacuum of denial. It demands presence, courage, and the willingness to sit in uncomfortable truths. Spirituality is not about perfection or constant bliss. It's about wholeness. And wholeness includes the shadow, the grief, the silence, and the aching questions that arise when life no longer fits the story we've been told to live. When conversations feel hollow, when small talk becomes unbearable, when being around others feels more draining than nourishing, it isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your soul is awakening to deeper frequencies that cannot be met by superficial noise. Those on a path of spiritual awakening often experience tension with the world because they are no longer willing to perform. They don't want to entertain or be entertained. They want truth. And truth requires space. It requires slowness. It requires that you pause long enough to hear the voice within you that's been buried under obligations and expectations. Jung reminded us that becoming who you truly are is the work of a lifetime. But you can't become that person if you're constantly plugged into everyone else's noise. You must dare to be silent. You must learn to be alone without being lonely. You must honor the quiet not as emptiness, but as a sacred field of transformation. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something real is beginning. So the next time you feel anxious in a loud room or guilty for needing space, remember that your resistance isn't dysfunction, it's wisdom. It's the sign that your spirituality is evolving, that your nervous system no longer tolerates what your soul has outgrown, and that your true life is not found in noise, but in the quiet clarity of being. 4. Social media weaponizes comparison and image crafting. Everyone is performing. On social media, they craft an illusion so carefully it almost feels real pictures that suggest joy, success, love, adventure. But if you look closely, you'll see the truth hidden in plain sight. Behind the filters and captions is quiet suffering, hidden insecurities, and emotional fatigue disguised as lifestyle inspiration. Real pain is replaced with the maintenance of an image. Instead of healing, people are managing a brand. And slowly, what used to be a tool for connection has become a mirror that reflects only what we wish we were never who we actually are. As Carl Jung warned, shame is a soul-eating emotion, and modern social media thrives on that shame, feeding our desire to be accepted while disconnecting us from our authentic self. The result is a collective spiritual sickness, one that doesn't show up in the body at first, but in the soul. It starts as comparison. You scroll, and suddenly your joy dulls. Your achievements feel smaller. Your presence starts to shrink. Everyone else seems ahead, happier, more loved, more aligned. You start chasing their rhythm instead of honoring your own. This isn't a coincidence, it's by design. The algorithm knows what will hook you: desire, envy, validation. Your nervous system, intelligent and ancient, is flooded with signals of inadequacy. You're not broken. You're reacting in a deeply human way to a machine built to manipulate emotion. This isn't spiritual awakening, it's psychological torture disguised as entertainment. What's even more dangerous is how this culture punishes honesty. When someone shares their real pain, it's seen as weakness, oversharing, or attention-seeking. But when someone fakes joy, they're rewarded. We've created a system that reinforces emotional dishonesty. And over time, that pressure forces people to disconnect from their truth. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world. And today, that mask isn't just worn, it's algorithmically enhanced. The more polished your mask, the more engagement you receive. But the soul doesn't thrive in performance. It withers. And we wonder why we feel so alone, even when we're constantly connected. True intelligence now lies in choosing presence over performance, depth over display, stillness over spectacle. Spiritual wisdom means reclaiming the parts of yourself that no longer fit into the polished narrative you've been crafting for others. It's asking yourself, what do I feel beneath the performance? And being brave enough to sit with that answer. This isn't about deleting social media. It's about no longer letting it shape your identity. When you stop comparing, you start connecting. When you stop performing, you start healing. And when you return to your inner truth, the noise loses its power. In a world built to distract you from yourself, coming home to who you are is the most intelligent act of rebellion. Have you ever caught yourself comparing your life to a filtered highlight reel online? If so, share your experience in the comments. Your honesty could help someone feel less alone. If not, comment, I will become more conscious to join this journey of spiritual awakening and authentic self-worth. 5. Existential loneliness and the rare individual. Some individuals walk through life carrying an ache they can't quite explain, too spiritually awake to conform, too emotionally aware to disconnect. They are not broken, just rare. These are the ones who experience what can only be called existential torture, an invisible wound that comes from seeing through the illusions of modern life while still longing to feel part of it. In a society that idolizes convenience and rewards obedience, the depth of their perception becomes a liability. They crave intimacy, not just interaction. They yearn for conversations that touch the soul, not scripts that follow social rules. Yet every encounter feels rehearsed, every smile a performance, every "how are you?" a ritual with no real listening. They're surrounded by people, but feel completely alone. Not because they are antisocial, but because their soul can no longer breathe in a world built on pretending. The world punishes authenticity, and so they suffer not from weakness, but from a rare form of strength. Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." For those who feel this way, the inferno isn't chaos on the outside. It's the quiet agony of being hyper-attuned in a world that demands numbness. The torture is subtle but relentless, pretending to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, forcing conversations that feel robotic, attending gatherings that feel more like costumes than communion. And yet, despite this alienation, there remains a burning need to connect, to be seen, to be felt, to be understood. But connection requires resonance. And when the vibration of your soul has shifted, most of the world will sound out of tune. This spiritual dissonance becomes the price of awakening. You don't want to isolate, but neither can you keep abandoning your truth just to belong. You begin to realize that this isolation is not rejection, it is redirection. It is your soul pulling you away from what is artificial, so it can prepare you for what is real. There is a sacred wisdom hidden in this loneliness. While others are chasing validation, you're being taught self-reverence. While others numb their discomfort, you're being shown how to feel it all and transmute it. You start to see your suffering not as failure, but as a sign of your depth. Your discomfort is not dysfunction. It is your nervous system rejecting falsehood. Your sadness is not weakness. It is grief for the parts of you that had to die to become this awake. In a world obsessed with speed, you are learning to pause. In a culture that praises conformity, you are choosing alignment. Spiritual awakening does not come with applause. It comes with silence, with solitude, with surrender. But in that sacred space, something miraculous happens, and you begin to hear your soul again. And once you hear it, you can never go back. You begin to recognize that the world was never designed for rare souls like yours to fit in. It was waiting for you to remember that you were never meant to. You were meant to awaken it. 6. Solitude is a sacred rebellion. Solitude, for those undergoing true spiritual development, is not loneliness. It is a sacred rebellion against a world obsessed with performance and noise. It is a return to clarity, to authenticity, to the unfiltered presence of self that no longer bows to shallow expectations. In solitude, there is no need to perform, no pressure to entertain, no mask to wear. It becomes a mirror where your soul can finally speak without interruption. This is not isolation. It is liberation. It is the space where your mind clears, your intuition sharpens, and your energy resets. Choosing solitude over superficial connection is not a flaw. It is the highest form of self-respect. You are no longer willing to be in rooms where your truth must be silenced to maintain false harmony. You are no longer available for relationships that exist only to distract you from yourself. The world will call this distance, but it is actually depth. Carl Jung reminds us that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. And when the world feels too noisy to hold your truth, you are not lost. You are being called inward. In solitude, you start to recognize the difference between connection and attachment. You stop mistaking attention for love. You begin to sense that your presence is too sacred to be spent in environments that don't nourish you. This is where spirituality deepens, not in the constant stimulation of the external world, but in the stillness that reveals what is real. You learn to sit with your emotions, to witness your shadows, to honor your truth without the need for applause. You realize that peace is not found in fixing everything outside of you. It's found in mastering the relationship within. And this mastery begins when you stop running from your own presence. The longer you sit with yourself, the clearer your boundaries become. The sharper your discernment grows, and the more aligned your life begins to feel. This is not withdrawal, it's refinement. You start to understand that some rooms go silent when you enter, not because you are invisible, but because your energy is louder than their noise. You are not too quiet. You are just tuned in to a different frequency. You are not too intense. You simply see through the illusion. And you are not too distant. You are just deeply connected to something most people have forgotten: their soul. When you choose solitude, you are not turning your back on the world. You are turning toward your inner world, which holds the key to everything meaningful. Solitude teaches you to be your own sanctuary. It trains you to stop seeking from others what only your spirit can provide. And in doing so, it elevates your relationships, because now you are no longer relating from emptiness, but from overflow. You give not to be needed, but to be true. You love not to fill a void, but to share a fullness. This is the power of solitude. It purifies your intention, it deepens your presence, and it sharpens your purpose. In the sacred stillness of your own being, you no longer beg to be seen, you radiate. You no longer chase connections, you embody it. And you no longer fear being alone, because you have met the only companion that will never abandon you yourself. Solitude isn't weakness, it's a sacred rebellion in a noisy world. If you're embracing this quiet power, subscribe for more wisdom on reclaiming your inner peace and rising above the chaos. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of spiritual insight. 7. The truth hurts, but liberates. You're not broken for feeling like modern social life is suffocating. You're just one of the few who can no longer numb your soul to survive in it. When you walk into a room and immediately sense the energy, when small talk feels like sandpaper against your skin, when everyone's smile looks rehearsed and you find yourself questioning why no one says what they truly feel. What you're experiencing isn't dysfunction. It's intelligence. It's spiritual wisdom. Carl Jung understood this when he said, "The more you become who you truly are, the more lonely the path may seem, because few have dared to travel there." You crave depth in a culture addicted to dopamine. You seek truth in a society designed for performance. You're not too intense. The world has simply become too comfortable with the shallow. Most people have adapted to the psychological theater playing roles, collecting praise, performing empathy. But you feel everything. You see the truth between the lines. You can't fake laughter when your heart feels heavy. You can't sit in rooms where everyone's pretending to be fine while silently screaming inside. And the truth is, that makes you rare. This world rewards masks more than it values authenticity. And for someone like you, whose nervous system is wired for sincerity that feels like torture, you weren't made to nod along in conversations that numb you. You weren't born to chase validation in rooms that drain you. You were born to stand in the raw, unfiltered light of who you are. But when you do, the world calls it too much. You see, people fear what they can't control, and authenticity, real soul presence, is uncontrollable. That's why your spiritual awakening feels like an exile. You've been cast out of the normal, not because you're wrong, but because you're awake. Jung taught that loneliness is not the absence of people, but the inability to communicate things that matter to you. So you sit in rooms full of people, feeling more alone than ever, not because you're antisocial, but because you're real in a world that forgot how to be. And even if others can't meet you in that truth, don't abandon it. Your desire for solitude is not escapism. It's your soul detoxing from societal noise. Your discomfort in surface-level connection is your higher self refusing to settle. And your sadness when people dismiss your depth is not weakness. It's evidence that your heart is still alive in a world that trades feeling for function. You don't have to apologize for wanting something real. You don't have to explain your silence or your sensitivity. Protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Be the one who brings soul back into the room. Be the one who doesn't pretend just to be accepted. Be the reminder that truth still exists, even if it's whispered. The world needs that, even if it doesn't say so. Stay rare. Stay real. Stay you. If this message made you feel seen in a world that often misunderstands the sensitive and introspective soul, know that you're not alone. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." In a society that rewards masks and punishes authenticity, choosing to stay rooted in your truth is a radical act of spiritual wisdom. If this resonated with you, help us grow this movement. Like this video, share it with someone who feels the same silent ache, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom so you never miss a moment of truth and healing. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell, because the next video might just be the reminder your soul has been waiting for.